In today's episode of our photography review show, we're gonna be looking at landscape, mixed team, product, and wildlife photographers. Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of our photography review show. I hope you had a great week, and I hope you're ready for more photography reviews. If you've never been here before, my name is Jakub, and I'm a professional photographer based in West Sussex, England. For the past 7 or 8 months, I've been reviewing your photos, and I reviewed thousands of images from hundreds of photographers. It's a lot of fun, and if you want to join us for the next episode, all you need to do is to join our membership, Clever Photographer Plus. If you want to find out more about it, head to our website, cleverphotographer.com. There you will find out that for a little fee, you will get a monthly bundle full of photography tools, including presets, overlays, LUTs, textures, and anything you can imagine for photography. You will also get access to this photography review show, as well as our Clever Photographer Academy on Facebook. But for now, we are all done, so let's jump and start with the reviewing. Okay, and here we are in Lightroom CC, where we're gonna be doing the reviewing. So we're gonna start with landscape photographers, and first one is from David. So David, I have 4 images from you here, so let's jump to them and start with you. So first we're gonna look at the camera details, and generally the way we do it, we look at the technical part of the image first, then we look at the composition, and we end up with some extra tips on photo editing. So you sent us 4 images, so let's just quickly go through them. This really nice like a watermill with little creek here, then more of the water with some nice long exposure. There's a really lovely bridge with lovely reflection and some nice mist that looks great, and then this one as well with lots of long exposure and different elements. So same style, so obviously a same series. Let's quickly jump through them and see. We are looking at 2 different lenses, but the same camera, am I right? No, even different camera. So let's start with this one first. So Nikon Z5 with a 24 to 120 millimeters on the lens. From the camera settings, ISO 100, 24 millimeters, f14, 1.3 second. So I'm assuming at this time of the day you probably have used long exposure with maybe like a ND filter, but from the camera settings, I think it's all looking good to me. The ISO 100 is great to make sure that you keep everything nice and low and you don't add any additional noise to the image. 24 millimeter is generally probably as wide as I go for this type of photography to keep everything natural and realistic. f14, making sure that everything is sharp and in focus. Obviously, probably also pushing up a little bit the exposure in this case. Generally, as much as I can, I try to stick between 7.1 and 11, but then when it technically does require to push it, like in this case, when you need a little longer exposure, I don't mind to go a little higher. I try to stay away from anything above f16 if I can, but that's just a rule of thumb, because generally after f16, I start to notice a little bit of softness and starting to lose sharpness and a detail. So that's just my suggestion from there. The rest looks good when we zoom in to 100%. Let's have a look here. Everything looks nice and sharp. I really like the level of details. The long exposure is looking really good too. The colors are very nice and vibrant. So in overall, it's very, very lovely image, and technically, I think very well handled. So we jump to this one. Also looking at the camera, let's have a look. So it's same camera and same lens with the camera setting. Very similar, ISO 100 again, so that's a great habit to keep it nice and low. 24 millimeters again is a good choice as well. f11, great choice, again making sure everything is nice and sharp, so when we zoom in you can see the details all the way through, which is brilliant. And the 3 second really give you a really lovely long exposure here, making everything nice and smooth. In general, when we're capturing a long exposure, in order for it to work, what it needs to come with is a contrast of really sharp additional elements. So for example, when you take a long exposure of a river, you have everything nice and smooth and silky. You then want the stones and everything else being super sharp. So that's something you really want to have a look at and make sure that it's nice. And in this case, it works because that is what creates the contrast. So I think technically very well done. Again, the level of details is very good. Similarly, like the first picture, lots of green here, but lovely image. Moving on this one, again, technically, this time we are on different lens and different camera. So this is Nikon D810 with 16 to 35 millimeters. And from the camera settings, ISO 64, 18 millimeters, f11, 6 seconds. So obviously bringing the ISO even lower, again, trying to help the shutter speed to go a little longer, which I think works very well in this case. You didn't even need to go too high with your f-stop. 18 millimeters on the lens is good as well, giving you this really kind of wide view. You can see how, for example, looking at the bridge, it's already starting to look like it's a little bit tilted, although the water is probably kind of leveled. So that's what you start to get when you start to go wider than 18 millimeters. However, it's still a lovely scene, and the 6 second looks great because it gives you this really smooth water, lovely fog, a nice reflection, and also the possibility to see inside of the water. So I think altogether it works very well. Moving to the final image, here again, same camera, different lens. So this time it's a Nikon D810 with 80 to 200 millimeters. So really going for the kind of little bit more punch in with the ISO 64. So keeping it nice and low, 80 millimeters, so quite zoomed in. f11 and 1.6 of second on the shutter speed. So I quite like the 1.6 because it gives you a little bit of texture on the water. I think that works very well. f11 again give us the details, that works nicely. 80 millimeters, it's a very nice scene. It's something a little bit different compared to the rest of the images. And I think the 64 on ISO again gives us a little bit of the long exposure and a lovely scene without additional noise. So we went through the technical part. Now composition wise, just very quickly, because we have 4 images. Starting from this one right here, I think the composition is quite nice, although I think it's a bit tricky to say what is the main subject, what is it really you're trying to showcase. Most probably because it's a really busy scene, so obviously it's a little bit missing a foreground element. Now there are some branches here I would probably try to avoid, or maybe just remove, even if with maybe just the kind of healing brush, just to kind of paint over them, try to remove them, to remove the distraction. And after that, you would need to find a way to maybe bring or highlight something that you try to bring attention into. So you have these branches, then you have the river, then you have this kind of piece here, then you have this long exposure here, and the little bridge, and then there is kind of brighter parts here. So I'm not exactly sure what I would do. I would maybe crop it a little bit tighter. What about if we try something maybe like this? At least we get reduce of the bottom. I think we at least lose some of the empty space and it gets a little bit more intensive. So that's maybe one thing. Then of course you could also maybe do some local adjustments with a little dodge and burn to add a little more interest to some parts of the image. Now moving into this one, out of the 3, probably my favorite one. It's a shame that it's kind of tilting a little bit, and I think again that's to do a little bit with the wider exposure, but I think it's really, really nice. The only thing I would do, I would probably again crop it a little bit more tighter. So I would just remove some of the bottom. Let's see, even if we would go as far as this and then just hit enter, you can see how the scene is again a little bit more intensive. Although I know that you probably like the view here and that it's all see-through, there's not that much really happening. And because there's that much as a space, suddenly the bridge isn't that big, so it's not really that you're working as your main subject, where when you crop all of that away and go quite tight, I think it works quite nicely. Suddenly the bridge is bigger. Also what we do, we take the reflection and place it in the middle of the picture, which optically always works very, very well. And the entire image just gets a little bit nicer. So I think something like this for me would work very well. If you would not want it to have as panoramatic, you could probably also get rid of some of these parts and maybe just end up with something like this. So for me, as I say, I think something like this and this view is great. Excellent. Then moving into this image, probably my second most favorite when it comes to composition, because of the flow. I think it really works very well here. There is no cropping need to be done here. I think it's just starting from here and then it kind of goes through and ends up at the back. I think that works very well. My only thing, I just wish that you would see a little bit more of the falls. I think that would be even more epic. But altogether, this is very nicely put together. I think it's quite strong composition. You have your foreground, middle ground, background. The fog actually helps with the depth, so I think that works very well. There is a lot happening, but not too much for the viewer, so I think this is very, very lovely picture. Where on this one, I understand the scene, but I think it either has to be about the building itself or about the creek, or you should have gone wider to have more space on the side. This part, which obviously is kind of important because of the building, but it's cropped away, it really does look a little bit more like it was there added, that you just didn't have more space to add the creek. So I would probably crop it away. Maybe something like this. Also, I would make sure that the building is straight. Also take away a little bit of the bottom. So let's see if we can rotate it to something like this to make it straight. Something like this. And then again, take off a little bit of the bottom, so we could do maybe something like this and end up with something like this. Now suddenly it's much more about the building. If I look at it like this, I would probably take even more of the bottom, and then you end up something like this, which is starting to look a little bit like a fantasy movie scene, which brings us to post-processing. So this now suddenly looking a little bit nicer for me, where you have lots of other stuff happening and it's there's just, you don't really know what to focus on. Suddenly we have this building here, and then you can really start to play around. Maybe you can bring the exposure down even a little bit more, add a little bit of contrast. Then what do we open a little bit of the shadows, so just something like this, and then we can go into the color, add a little bit of magenta just to remove the green from the overall image. And more importantly, I would use some local adjustments. So I would use little radial gradient on the actual mill here and just add a little bit of exposure and a little bit of focus on it. So it kind of works a little bit like a torch. You see when I move it around, it just adds a little bit more interest there. So I think something like this. While we on it, we can also add a little bit of texture to it. So that I think works quite nicely too. If we would want to, we can come back and go into our color mixer, and in a color mixer go into a hue, and with our green maybe we want to make it a little more yellow, because when I look at your image I can already see you have some yellow here, so we just want to help to it a little bit by bringing the yellow down just a little bit like this. Not yellow, green, sorry. On a green we can make it just a little bit more yellow, just a touch, something like this, and then go into our saturation and maybe increase the brown and orange in a contrast with the rest of it, just to make it even more interesting. To finish it off, definitely I would finish it with a vignette. So I would do something like this and maybe close the image even more from the bottom here by using the linear gradient. So something like this. No. Bring it down and actually close the image. So something like this. Finally, maybe just a brush with a little bit of extra exposure and just paint over the areas which we find interesting, like the little wheel here, and I think that's too strong. Maybe still a little bit of the house, maybe the little bridge here, and create little path, maybe more at this part here. And that's about it. Now I think it's a little bit strong, so we can bring it down a little, something like this, and that's about it. Let's have a look. Before and after, and again, it's starting to look a little bit like from a movie. I think it's a great scene. So, David, because we have to move to the other ones, here is an example of what I would do. I hope this was helpful. If you have more images, make sure you send them over. Otherwise, I think it's all very good, very natural edit with lots of beautiful colors and great long exposure. So take care, stay safe, and I hope to see more of your images in the future. Moving on, John Lister, we have 2 images from you. Great long exposure and this epic sunset over this lighthouse here. So John, let's have a look at it. Starting with this image right here, Nikon D750 with the 17 to 35 millimeter lens, really wide lens, and with the camera setting ISO 100, 35 millimeters, f8, 1/10 of a second. So ISO 100 is nice, giving you nice clean image. 35 millimeters, giving it and keeping it all natural, including the horizontal line. f8, great, again making sure that we have the details all the way, but then getting a little bit of depth at the back, which I think works very well here. And 1/10 of a second, making sure that we have lots of details in the sky and all together. So all together, John, this is brilliant. I love this image. Very, very cool. Love the colors. You know, I'm a big fan of sunset photography. I think it works very well here. The leading line, the main focal point works very well. It's an excellent, excellent image. Well done here. And I think technically very well handled. After that, we're going to move here on your long exposure. So here we are on Nikon D750, 17 to 35 millimeters on the lens. And this time we are on ISO 80, so nice and low, 25 millimeters, which is usually generally about as wide as I go in landscape environment. f8, good as well, giving us the sharpness and details all the way through. And 1/5 of a second, so it's not really super long exposure, it's just kind of nice smooth effect, which actually looks very well because it does give us a little bit of texture in the water. So that's very well handled and very well edited. So technically very well done. Now moving to the composition, I think it's actually very well done here. Now it's a little bit dark, and I try to see if on my screen maybe I'm a little bit too low. However, some parts of the darker parts, I would open them a little bit more. However, the contrast of the bright of the water with the rest works well. The contrast of the color works well. I think as a main subject, it's clear and it's an epic scene. So altogether, John, I think this is a lovely picture and definitely something to be proud of. When it comes to composition here, now you put the lighthouse in a center, which is very smart, just one way to do it, with obviously the leading line coming from here. It's a little bit of a shame that this tree is kind of big because it's quite dominant at the front of the image, and when you look at it really kind of closer, you can see that it's a little bit soft. So obviously you were focusing more on this part of the image, which is perfectly fine, but that's probably the only thing. You could kind of then go on and think of some other ways how you could improve the composition. One thing would be, was there a possibility to get a little lower and maybe get the lighthouse over the horizon? That would be something you could have done. Another thing is, could you maybe zoom in a little closer and just get the path? Just kind of different things to try for next time. I would be quite happy to see if there was a possibility to photograph the path in the center. That would be another way to look at it, and so on. If you would really want to go a little bit more intensity, if you would want to add a little bit more intensity, I would probably maybe get a radius of maybe just a little side, maybe not that much, maybe just something a little bit like this, and get a little bit more of the main subject in. However, I think what you've done works very well, and I don't really have much to say and change to it. When it comes to post-processing, I think this one is perfect. I think it's super well done. The sky is very, very nice. The color, the white balance works well. The highlights and shadows are very well handled here. I think a little bit of the brighter areas and darker areas again works well here. And I think it's epic image, which definitely deserves to be printed and put on a wall, because I'm sure it would look great. So well done, John. Brilliant image. Moving on, this picture here, as I said earlier, the only thing I can kind of think of is opening up a little bit the shadows, a little bit more, just a touch, nothing crazy, maybe just somewhere around 15, just to see the details, not to have it completely black. But the rest works very well for me. I think the colors are good, the white balance is quite natural, the water is white and clean, which I think is cool as well. There's just enough of brightness on it. I think the exposure is good as well. I really like this, it's quite, I like that it's quite clean view, you know, so it's kind of not obstructed, which is sometimes difficult to get. And I think altogether it's a great image. So John, thank you very much for sharing it with us. I am looking forward to see more images from you. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and bye-bye. Which brings us to mixed team photographers. Okay, so starting with the Blake and his two images. However, Blake, I believe that I have reviewed this image last week. Let's quickly have a look. Last week, Blake, yep, I already had a look at this picture last week, so if you have a new one, make sure you send it over. Otherwise, we will look at the picture number 2, which is a very lovely capture, almost like a macro photography of this flower. Now, similarly to last week, Blake, looking at the size, it's really shame because it's really tricky for me to give you any kind of hints on a technical part, as it's really small, 128 kilobytes. It's like a super, super small. So when I zoom in and look for the details, it gets super pixelated and I can't really judge it. Now, I can tell you that as a composition goes, I think it's very, very lovely. I love the depth. I think that works very well here. I think the composition and the position of the flowers works very well here as well. The contrast of the colors is brilliant. I like that you can see a little bit of the flowers at the back. I think that works very nicely to create the overall scene, and the amount of details across the two flowers works brilliantly. Now, when it comes to post-processing, I love this fade effect. I love the saturation, and I think it looks very, very nice and powerful. So well done for that. And then overall, it's a lovely, lovely image with which would really attract lots of people. You could kind of crop it multiple different ways. You could also do just like a portrait crop with the flower in the center, and I think it's very well done. So Blake, just maybe a new image for next time, and when you send the images, make sure they are higher resolution than this, so I can give you a little bit more tricks on what to do with them. Which brings us to next photographer, and we have Donna. Donna, 2 images from you. Thank you so much for joining us again. I absolutely love this one. I think it's brilliant. I love the kind of silhouette effect with the bird actually standing there. I think it's epic. Beautiful, beautiful image. And this one is gorgeous as well, with the details of the water coming from the bird. Very well captured. Excellent image. So let's have a look at it. Let's start with this one, starting by looking at your camera. So Nikon D850 with a 200 to 500 millimeter lens. Now looking at the ISO 100, so keeping it nice and low, which is always good. 500 millimeters, so punched all the way in. f5.6, giving you kind of softer background, and 1/800 of a second, giving you very decent sharpness. Maybe you done a little bit of post-processing to it after. You can see few kind of details here. You can see how here it's really sharp and then it goes into the softer. You also can see some of the feathers or whatever is it here. However, in overall, when you look at the image like this, I think it's very, very nice. Again, the water drops, they really make it look cool. The contrast is brilliant. A little bit of the reflection works very well here. So altogether, Donna, technically, I think very well done. Moving on this one, again, brilliant capture by Nikon D850, 200 to 500 millimeters again, this time on ISO 500, which is not a big deal. I think for a wildlife photography, it's all good. 280 millimeters, so not zoomed all the way through, f11, and 1/1600 of a second, making sure that everything is nice and sharp. So again, as a silhouette, with the frame and with the bird standing on it, I think it's cool. Really, really epic capture. Lovely colors, lots of details, and the black, the kind of silhouette effect just looking great. So when it comes to composition on this one, absolutely nothing to add. I mean, you can only dream about the bird sitting on the sign with this sky and this environment behind. Altogether, it's brilliant. Really, really like it. When it comes to composition here, again, very, very, very well done. I love the blue as a background with the kind of bright white on our main subject, creating a really nice contrast, not only as a colors, but also as a brightness. I think it works all very well. The contrast of the details and the depth works very well here. The main subject is obviously clear and direct, and I think it works very well. So both of them as a composition goes very well handled. When we're talking about post-processing, I actually won't have that much to do. I like your white balance. The white is really white. It's nicely saturated, so it's kind of appealing to the people, which works very well. Maybe just keep an eye on the kind of zones where you're adding a little bit of the softness, making sure that it's not visible at all. However, in overall, it's a lovely image. And it's well handled, so not much to add here. Similarly on this one, I think the white balance is well handled. I think the silhouette effect with the highlights and shadows is well done as well. And I think even as a postcard, this would look great. So Donna, 2 great pictures. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. Excellent job, and something you should be definitely proud of. So if you have more images, make sure you send them to us in the future. And in the meantime, stay safe and take care. Which brings us to Evgeniy. Evgeniy, something a little bit different this week. That's always good to see. So obviously this gentleman is a surfer on the beach. Very, very lovely. And then a little macro photography with the strawberry. A very detailed shot, looking great with the lovely light as well. Lots of lovely details and an excellent capture. So starting with this image, we are talking about your favorite Pentax K100D. Now looking at the camera settings, ISO 200 with the 50 millimeters, f8 and 1/750th of a second. So let's zoom in. Looking at it, I mean, obviously when you zoom in a little bit, it's a little bit pixelated, but I think in overall the sharpness is quite nice. The image in overall has a lovely colors, lovely level of details. I think the sky is quite nice too, and it works all very well. Now, there is a little bit of noise on it, but nothing crazy, so that works too well too. And then overall, it's not too contrasty because of the sun, so I think it's a lovely picture. I think it's very well done. Now talking about this one, ISO 200, 190 millimeters, 1/125th of a second, giving us this beautiful picture with lots of colors, lots of details, and very nice light. Lots of kind of nice contrast, creating beautiful scene. When it comes to composition, I think it's also very well done. The main strawberry all in focus with a little bit of focus on those two, and then slowly kind of disappearing with the depth, well handled. It's very appealing picture, which could be used for advertise for strawberries, and it's just all very well done, Evgeniy. So well done on this one. It's a great picture. I think the composition is super well done. The contrast of the colors, of course, works very well. You immediately looking at the strawberry, and it's well handled. Talking about this one, lots happening here. So obviously, because the scene is quite epic, it's not all about the surfer. He's there in addition to just give us a little bit of sense of scale and depth, which I think works very well. If that's the case, I would probably try to position him next time maybe more in one of these little corners, just to kind of keep him more visually balanced. But in overall, it's still a nice scene, very well handled. I wonder if you would go a little bit higher like this, maybe you would lose the main wave, but it would be a little bit more about the surfer, so that's something you could definitely try. I think this picture would actually look also very good as on portrait, so then you would get more something like this, and it would be equally nice. So just kind of different things to try and test and see what works the best for you. When it comes to post-processing, nothing much I would add here really. I think it's very well done. Highlights, shadows, very well done. The white balance is very natural. It's very kind of seaside kind of feel color, so I think it works all very well, and it's very well handled. When it comes to this one, again, it's definitely your style with this kind of heavier vignette. Just keep an eye on it to make sure that you don't completely darken the corners, but in overall excellent picture, beautiful white balance, well handled shadows and highlights, and just great capture. So Evgeniy, thank you so much as always. I'm happy to see a different style again, just to see something else that you can try. Anyway, stay safe, and if you have more pictures, make sure you send them to us in the future. Which brings us to our friend Marcus. Marcus, we have 2 images. The lady here, and I wonder, can I zoom out a little further? No. So this is the crop. So we have a portrait photo and this landscape photo. So let's jump to it and start with the portrait, looking at your camera settings. So Nikon Z6 with the Nikon 400 millimeters. With the camera settings, ISO 3200, heavy ISO on this one, 400 millimeters, so really zoomed all the way in, and f3.5 giving us this nice soft background. 1/60th of a second. For a human, it's quite low for a portrait, for my opinion. However, still, that's how it is. I think there are 2 things I would be kind of looking at here. Is a really high ISO, and I can see that you've done some post-processing to it to remove the noise probably. Now, as it is not as visible on the background because that's blurry already anyway, however, it's really visible on her face. It's almost like it's painted with the watercolors. And 1/60th of a second actually give you quite nice sharp image. But again, maybe I would have gone a little bit faster just to be safe. But faster would have mean higher ISO and so on. So maybe altogether, when you look at the setting, you can see that it wasn't the most ideal condition for portrait, probably too dark, and maybe that's what is something to kind of look at for next time and in a future, because that when if it would have been less, you wouldn't have to do such a heavy edit, and it would end up being maybe a little bit easier. Also, lots of sensor dust here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, something again to keep an eye on, as it is quite distracting, these little spots. It looks like you have something dirty on the background of the image. Moving on this one, lovely image with a lovely reflection, Nikon Z9 with a 10mm lens. Now from the camera settings, ISO 64, 10mm, f8, 1/200 of a second. So as the camera setting goes, I think you're spot on. I mean, when it comes to landscape, I barely ever really have anything to add to your images because the camera setting is always spot on. Low ISO, 10mm is quite wide, but for a scene like this, I don't think it matters. f8, making sure that everything is sharp, and 1/200 of a second, giving us the details in the sky. We have a lovely mix of colors, nice saturation, and lovely reflection. So altogether, very well done. Moving into the composition. Now, as the composition goes, I would probably crop a little bit of the sky on the top, just to place the reflection in the middle. I think that generally creates a little bit more balanced composition. Maybe not like this, maybe more like this. And in overall, it kind of put everything together where the human eyes are going. I think it works very well. Now, I'm not crazy about the foreground element here, just because it's a little bit cut off, and it's not really that pretty. The rest of the scene is very nice, where this is kind of old, rusty, and a little bit distracting. So you have this really balanced scene with the reflection, a nice calming sky, and the colors, and then you have this rusty, old kind of steps. So I would probably try to avoid them in the future. However, the rest I think is good. Now, when we're talking about this lady here, so first, I think she's kind of cropped, kind of strange way. I would have probably tried to keep her on one on the other side as she's kind of going away. I wonder if you have gone something like this. It's almost getting like a passport photo. So I would have probably flipped it the other way around. I would have given her more space here because she's facing away from the scene. So you kind of need more active zone in front. And really the composition isn't bad. I would have maybe add more space around her. However, it's more the technical part where you have the sensor dust, you have really heavy editing, making her really soft. And that's more something I would be looking at rather than worrying about the composition. Which brings us to post-processing, and while we here we already mentioned it, so I don't have to go through it again. However, the sensor dust, less editing on the face, more natural colors, and just kind of take it from there. Which brings us to this, and the post-processing, no, nothing much to add. I mean, it's nicely done, closed from the bottom, maybe more closed from the top. Altogether, it's nice, bright, nicely saturated, with a lovely composition. So, as always, a good job. Few tips on how to do things differently, how to try things differently in the future. I hope it's going to be helpful. And of course, as always, if you have more images, make sure you send them over to us. Which brings us to Zdenek. Now, Zdenek is in South Africa, first of all. Second of all, he just won the Photography of the Week for Skyline and Luminar. So one more time, Zdenek, congratulations. I'm super proud of you. I love the image you won with. I'm not surprised at all. And I think I've seen it before, and it's amazing. I've seen some of your portrait work. I think when we were doing the competition, you did some edit as well. And it's clearly something you very talented with. So congratulations again. Well done. Great job. So obviously, because there is a winter, maybe we're trying something a little bit different. And that's a little bit of kind of product style photography. But we have this old camera with a reflection. And then we have an egg. So let's have a look at it. Let's start by looking at the camera details with the camera. So Canon M6 with 15 to 45 millimeters. Now from the camera settings, ISO 160, very cool, keeping it nice and without noise. 19 millimeters is really wide for a scene like this, and for the product photo, generally we would go for something little bit less wider. F4. Yeah, that's all good. Keeping the shutter speed nice and low, so 1/60th of a second is all good. So just kind of few things, maybe not as wide would be my suggestion. The light is a little bit harsh. I mean, you have a really dark areas around, so it's a good start. However, I would either I would go for more complete dark background, so without all of these, or less kind of a lighter flush, I think, if you were using flush, because you can see how some areas are really strong and some are really contrasting. So that would be for this one. However, the details are very, very good. I really like that. The texture, the colors works all nice. The reflection is all the way there. You can see on the reflection a little bit of the highlights, but altogether it's a good attempt. Which brings us to the egg, which is actually perfect. Very, very nice. The light, especially when you're photographing something white, it's not easy. White on white background, it's never really easy. Now, looking at the camera settings on this one, we're talking about ISO 100, 45 millimeters, f9, and 1/125th of a second. So, camera settings, better here, 45 millimeters, I think better as well. f9 with this background doesn't really matter that much, so it's nicely done, and 125th second works very well. I think the light is much nicer here. I think it's much more natural, so that's very nicely done. And altogether, it's a lovely attempt of a picture of an egg. Which brings us to composition. And we're gonna do the photo editing at the same time, because I think we can do that on both of the images. So as the composition goes, I mean, it's a picture of an egg. So you kind of wonder, it's more for practicing, trying to see different things, because if you would try to take a picture of it, maybe you would like some kind of additional elements with it to make it a little bit more interesting. So of course, as a picture of an egg and egg holder, it's lovely. However, if you would want to be really detailed, I would try to remove the, the dirt here. Definitely something you can easily do with something like healing brush, it wouldn't even take that long. And I think when you have such a clean composition, you really want to take care of these just to keep it nice and clean. Also for the dish, maybe next time try to find something which is a little bit like cleaner or has all the same colors. You can see a little bit of brown, and again, something that you could kind of work around with. The light is nice, and actually I wouldn't do much here. Maybe just keep an eye on your white, and that's about it. Now, moving on this one, similarly, I think you kind of need to make sure that your mirror is clean, because you can see either it's scratched or there is a lot of dust. Now, to remove the dust, first you polish it with whatever you have. I generally use like a window cleaner, which I spray it, then I clean it, and then I use not paper, but it's like a paper without fibers in it to really polish it. When I'm done, I put the product on it, and then I use the air duster, like in the spray. I don't know if you can see it. And I use it to remove all the dust away, so the image is really nice and clean. So I think that would be the first thing, because as soon as I look at the image, that's the one thing that I find a little bit distracting, and that's the amount of noise and dust. So starting from there, then play around with the light to make it a little bit more soft and natural, and darken the background, and that's where I would take it from. Zdenek, something a little bit different. Thank you very much. It's always exciting to see that you try different things. One more time, congratulations on your Skylum capture, and you stay safe, take care, and I can't wait to see more pictures from you soon. And that brings us to final photographer, and traditionally Ken Kamlet. Ken, we have two wildlife photographies here, so let's start with this lovely bird. Now this is a northern cardinal, if I am right. So let's have a look at it. Beautiful image. Again, Nikon Coolpix P1000 with ISO 360, 155 millimeters, f5.6, 1/500th of a second. So lovely capture, beautiful bird. But then I told you that several times when I saw it in the past. The ISO is a little bit higher, giving us obviously a little bit noise. And again, it's not as sharp as I would hope. It also gives you a little bit of glow around. So that's just something to maybe look after. I think when you push the saturation, that's maybe when these things comes out a little bit more. 1/500th of a second on the other side give you a really nice sharp capture, so that works very well. So altogether, I think technically it's nicely done. Try to minimize your ISO as much as you can, and you can do that by maybe play around with the f-stop or adjusting the shutter speed to something that is reasonable for the sharpness of the bird, and removing the noise altogether. Moving on to this one, obviously a deer, ISO 400, 39 millimeters, f4.5, 1/30th of a second. So ISO 400, again, quite high. When we look at it, you can see it's starting to look a little bit like watercolors after the noise reduction. 39 millimeters is a good size, f4.5. Still, even 4.5 doesn't give you the depth I would hope for. I would hope that maybe your animal will be more in focus compared to the rest of the image. 1/30th of a second give you quite nice sharp image, so that's quite nicely done. However, the kind of watercolor artifact is something what you need to look at. Otherwise, very good, which brings us to composition. As a composition goes, and I'm sure you will know what I'm going to tell you, and that's to add more space at the bottom. I wish that I'm not a big fan of going really all the way to the edges of the pictures. I think it's something you really need to keep an eye on. And in this case, it's exactly the same. You really want to keep the space at the bottom to make sure that it all works very well. So I would have added more space on the bottom, and actually probably you could remove a little bit on the top if you would want to. I think the center composition works quite well, so I would leave it there. As a composition goes on this one, I think it's brilliant. A little bit of extra space on one side would make it a little bit different, but I think both of them work, so I think this is nice. Generally with the portrait captures, you can be a little bit more experimental, so that's why this picture works very, very well. So when it comes to post-processing, I would go in a color and remove a little bit of the saturation just to make it a little bit more natural. Also add a little bit of vignette, so something like this, and then leave it from there. And on this one, what I would do, I would actually increase the saturation here and then go into our colors and maybe bring a little bit more green back and maybe a little bit of the orange just to make it all stand out. And then again, maybe in the effects and bring down the vignette a little bit. Nothing crazy, but something like this, before and after. And that's about it, Ken. Thank you very much for sending us your photos. Love the bird. The deer is very nice too. Just keep an eye on the cropping and on the framing next time. And as always, stay safe, take care, and I can't wait to see more pictures of you next time. For all of you, I will be away next week, so the next episode will be just before the end of the August, but you can already send your images if you want to. You can find them on the Clever Photographer Plus, or you can also find them in a group. We will be sending the usual reminders, so we are all good. Anyway, for today, thank you very much for joining me. You stay safe, take care, have a great rest of the week, and I will see you all in 2 weeks.